Now, there's always a discussion ongoing, quite understandably and rightly, about mental health in this part of the world. And as time passes, we're becoming more and more conscious of the importance of mental health and learning more about how it might be improved or treated when problems arise. One of the more contentious forms of treatment still commonly used is electroconvulsive therapy. It's known as ECT. It's used around 20,000 times a year across the UK in the NHS and in the Royal College of Psychiatrists. They are saying that it offers life-saving treatment and it should be considered in severe cases. I want to speak to a person who's an expert in the field, Professor John Reid. Professor Reid, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us on the programme. You're making presentations on this and you're not overly impressed by what is known as electroconvulsive therapy. Explain to us, first of all, what exactly it is.
Well, it's the passing of equivalent of 150 volts through the human brain, which is equipped to deal with tiny fractions of 1 volt, with the intention of causing grand mal seizures. And somehow that is thought to improve conditions like depression and, to some extent, schizophrenia. So it's a rather strange idea, because you've got one branch of medicine trying to sort of cure seizure disorders, and another branch of medicine sort of causing convulsions, which is a rather strange thing to be doing.
There seem to be a considerable number of professionals who believe it is life-saving treatment.
No, actually, it's a very small number of people who still believe that. It's a dwindling number of psychiatrists who still believe that there's something beneficial about passing electricity through the human brain, and there is no evidence that it saves lives at all. In fact, many studies showed it increases the chances of suicide afterwards, largely because of the memory loss and brain damage it causes.
What choice are you given whenever it's offered to you, or are you in a state where you wouldn't be able to make a choice when it is bestowed upon you?
Well, our research, our audits of how ECT is used in the United Kingdom suggest that about 40% of people are given it completely against their will. So they say, no, I don't want that, and they're given it anyway. And they're deemed to not be well enough to know what is best for them, which is a very dubious process, which involves some quite serious human rights issues.
We tend to have I have a picture in my head of something that's very painful. Is that true? Is it painful, or is it delivered in such a way that it's nothing more than a quick jolt?
No, it's not painful. It's delivered with a general anaesthetic. It can be painful afterwards with headaches and so forth. But no, the actual process itself, people don't really know anything about and usually can't remember anything, because that period and the period leading up to it is completely wiped out by the process itself. So
those who would go through it, how would they know whether or not they'd really benefited from it, or indeed, how would they know if it was to their detriment?
That's an excellent question. There's very inadequate monitoring of the outcomes, positive and negative. But we're running a survey at the moment, an online survey of hundreds of people around the world. And the majority of people, when asked overall, have you received more benefit than harm, the vast majority say it was more harmful than helpful, and that those harmful effects last for years. That's primarily the loss of memory. So people are talking about not being able to remember being married, not being able to remember the early years of the children that they brought up, which is quite an awful thing to inflict on people.
It sounds harrowing, and I presume that people are doing it or delivering it for the best of intentions. But if you're in a position whereby you're deemed to be a person who needs this, your life must be at a serious crisis point. And this is why you're part of a very important discussion. It's a campaign, New Script for Mental Health. We need to be talking about mental health, and we need to be debating and discussing all issues around it.
Absolutely. This is ECT is just a tip of the iceberg of the problem we have, not just in Northern Ireland, of the medicalisation of human distress. So this is the tip of the iceberg. It's the worst example of a whole range of treatments that are not particularly helpful and do have some adverse effects. I mean, for instance, in Northern Ireland at the moment, you have 1 in 5 people on antidepressants every year. That's how far the medicalisation of human distress has gone. And we need to get back to a common sense approach, which tells us that depressing things are what cause depression, not some imagined chemical imbalance that needs fixing with electricity or chemicals. So that's where our mental health services are going wrong. We have this medicalised understanding of human distress, where in fact everybody knows that basically depression is caused by bad things happening, and that's what our mental health system needs to address.
Yes, but what is your definition of depressing things? Obviously, if someone's been through immense trauma as a child or had experiences that no one would want visited upon them, that will affect your mental health. But a person who has lived a life which, for want of a better term, is completely normal, they've had no adverse or negative influences in their life, but they feel depressed or they are depressed. What is it that causes that?
Well, that's very rare, actually, somebody to feel very depressed without some major losses or adverse events. It can happen, and there might be some medical conditions like thyroid conditions that can cause that, but it's extremely rare. 95% of people with severe depression are feeling that way because something's happened in their life or a series of things have happened in their lives. And that's what they need help with. And that's what the PPR movement and the New Script movement are trying to move us towards, a mental health system that asks people what's going on in your life, what's happened in your life, what do you need help with, not just count symptoms and pick a colour pill and give a diagnostic label, which is where we're at the moment.
Yeah, but there'll be many people listening to this programme who would say, well, nothing's happened to me in my life. I've had a very fair chance to go through life in as positive a way as possible, but I'm sitting here feeling really gloomy. I'm finding it hard to get out of bed in the morning. I'm in low mood on a regular basis, but they still haven't been through a trauma. There are many people like that. It may not be a serious element of mental distress, but it certainly impacts on their life from time to time.
Well,
sound like as if you're at the airport at this present moment in time. But what would your point be on that, Professor?
Well, I think Lisa could probably answer that just as well. But my brief answer is that there aren't many people like that. I would dispute the fact that there's many people feeling extremely depressed without anything happening. Okay,
you feel that you've got to get to the bottom of what the reason is for the depression. Professor, thank you. You mentioned Lisa. That's Lisa Morrison, who indeed was through this particular treatment, the electroconvulsive therapy. Lisa, good morning.
Good morning.
Lisa, just...
Sorry
You're okay. You're far away. Just on the electroconvulsive therapy, you experienced it and you're campaigning against it, am I right?
Yes, well, I'm campaigning for people to know their rights around it. And if you wouldn't mind me just going back to what you were saying about why are people depressed, I think we need to be looking at issues such as poverty, inequality, the infrastructure, access to services, GPs going private is another issue. So there are many ways people are working in conditions, in traumatizing systems, and I think sometimes trauma can be a word that is used to exclude. So people think of trauma as big T's, whereas for many people, if you look at the state of the world at the moment, there's a lot going on that is quite chaotic, and that can cause a lot of fear and uncertainty. So I think, and by medicalising and individualising distress, what we're actually doing is locating blame within people rather than saying these are social and political issues. These are the environments in which people are living and working that are unsafe and that people don't feel, supported in. So just to say about that, I think and that's part of what New Script is doing, is saying this is a far wider issue. And in fact, not talking about these issues allows those power dynamics to continue, where those in power are basically let off the hook because sure, the problems within each of us
Yeah, there's so
rather than-
I can't argue with you at all. There are so many relevant strands that you've touched on there. But I'm just wondering about people who seem to have everything going for them, who don't have negatives in their life, who are still depressed. What's the reason for that?
Oh, there can be so many reasons: relationship difficulties, a lack of satisfaction and purpose in your life. Sometimes people aren't even aware of what's going on for them, this general feeling of dissatisfaction. We can have many things, and yet if we don't feel, we know it's a biological need for us to be connected to other human beings. And we're increasingly in isolated communities and people, and we actually need those social relationships, people we feel we can trust, reveal our true selves with. We're living in a society which supports success, looks at financial wealth, academic achievement, those kind of things. So it's a very big picture. But I think in terms of mental health, there are serious human rights violations going on at the moment. And the issue around ECT, I'm a person who was in and out of a local inpatient unit for 8 years, and I received 6 courses of ECT. That's 72 shocks to my brain. When the issues that I was facing were social, there was violence against tomorrow's International Women's Day. The issues that I experienced predominantly in my life that led me to be depressed, suicidal, and labeled with many diagnoses were bad things that happened to me. And that's down to, injustice, inequality, and that was never addressed. So the problem was me, and the symptoms were located in me, and I lost hope within the system because that was what was being treated, and nobody was being particularly bad to me. People in the most actually were kind and caring, but unfortunately we have a medicalised system. So what I was treated with was predominantly medications, and I never got any therapy for the traumas that I had experienced. And I'm sitting in a position now where it feels like the medicalisation of my distress and in terms of women or people who've experienced violence, that ECT was another violence visited on me, because I'm now left in the position where I have no memories of my marriage, my children, birthdays, special birthdays. I was a childminder for a year with my son and other children. I don't remember that whole year.
That is very, very distressing, the picture that you paint. It is incredibly distressing. But what's the alternative now, not to ECT, but what's the alternative to medication? Because the professor and yourself are both campaigning against medication. What's the real alternative?
This is not about being against medication. There's a place for medication. It's about people knowing the safety and the efficacy. We're not told about withdrawal symptoms. John can tell you a bit more about the research, about the effectiveness. Very often what medications do is they actually just numb your feelings. And sometimes that can be helpful.
Yeah, but I understand that, but you're still campaigning against the medication. I'm asking for a suggestion as to what's the alternative.
Yes. The suggestion are creative solutions. We know the research tells us that community-based alternatives, other ways of thinking about mental health, addressing social causes, and we're not anti-medication, just to say we're campaigning about rights around these issues, that people have full knowledge, and John can speak more on this.
Well, I don't have much more time on it, but Lisa, really do appreciate your input. Professor, just one final point. This is a reminder of how important the conversation about mental health is.
Yes, it is, and we need to move it away from simplistic biological explanations of human distress towards all the things that Lisa has just been talking about. People get better from distress one way or another by interacting with other human beings and being listened to and cared about. That's all we're talking about.
Yeah, it's an important element of the conversation. Professor John Reid, Professor of Clinical Psychology at the University of East London. Thank you. Lisa Morrison, thank you very much for your insight into what has been a very distressing period of your life, Lisa, and I really appreciate you coming on the programme. Thank you.